My interest in Kyrgyz poetics lies in its sonic and its meaningful resonances, both with the body and with the wider environment. And I'm also interested in how this can transform through time as bodies and landscapes and social practices and social meanings change. And Kyrgyz oral epic is obviously a wonderful source of the temporal transformations of Central Asian poetics, but perhaps what's less obvious is the importance of the resonance of the body and the landscape for this cultural form. Now, as has already been said, I'm neither an ethnomusicologist nor a musician. I'm an anthropologist of textiles and Kyrgyz felt in particular. But the reasons I'm drawn to Kyrgyz poetics are the parallels I see in the dynamics of production and of change between the two artefacts. And I'm not going to have much time to really focus on that, but you can always ask me about that later. Between these two art forms and the way they're both clearly situated, and this is important, in a belief system which in more rural areas at least still foregrounds a very specific relationship with the environment, which is one of balance and one in which human destinies and the destinies of other inhabitants and forces in the environment, whether animals or places or weather, are closely interwoven. Now, one of my arguments is that a significant feature of Kyrgyz epic is the powerful imagery created through sound and through words. And I'm ultimately arguing that the performance of Manas evokes a presence, including a visual presence. So because of this, I'm accompanying my lecture with the kinds of visual images evoked by Manas alongside the sounds used to evoke them. To paraphrase Earlman, I'm giving the eye place alongside the ear, and I hope that doesn't distract people. To set this in context, I'd like to begin by playing a brief soundbite from a recording I made of a Manaschi in Kyrgyzstan a little while ago, just so those of you who aren't familiar with what it sounds like, you'll be able to just hear very briefly. Now, Manas is one of several, if not many, Central Asian epics, almost all of which are related as people's histories are related. So that each epic across the region gives a particular poetic perspective on events and historical characters in the region through time. And for my Kyrgyz friends, Manas is the longest, most developed, most original, authentic, and possibly the longest living epic in the world still performed today, so they say. I have to say that I too probably think it's so, in that it seems to be Manas that above all stands out, but one has to bear this in mind within the context of the fact that a lot of the episodes of Manas were pulled together during the Soviet period, which gives it this kind of overarching umbrella, if you like. Now, like all epics, Manas is centred on the life of a battle, a local hero, and he, for heroes, such heroes are usually men, led or had led the Kyrgyz from exile in the Altai Mountains back to their motherland in Alai. And Manas is larger than life. He's incorruptible honour. It's a feature of epics. He's hugely brave. He has superhuman strength. And you can see him here depicted by Theodor Herzl, a German woodcut artist of the Soviet era, and how around the edges of the image there are the powerful sacred animals depicted, evoking Manas's connection with the environment in all its most sacred and unspirited aspects, including eagles and dragons, the dragon at the foot, as you can see. Now, Manas is not just sung, and I have to tell you a brief version of the story, and I'm telling you a story as I was told in the field. He's certainly not just sung, he's also recounted in daily mealtime conversations, in allegorical comments made to children, he's discussed on the television, and in explanations to people like me who didn't grow up with him. Ilgari, Ilgari, long ago, I was told, there was a Khan, Jacob, who was Manas's father. He had many animals, many herds, but he had no children, and he was old. His wife, Chirdi, was 50, and he was so worried he had so much land and so many animals. Thinking of his family line, he said, well, who will be instead of me when I have died? So he went into his bozu, his tent, and he slept, and he had a dream, and it showed his son, who would become head over the Kyrgyz people and be Khan. And the Bubu Bakshi, the midwife, helped Chirdi bear her son, and he was huge. His mother was in labour for 3 days. Finally, the baby fought his way out, clutching a clot of blood in his hand as big as the liver of a sheep. And he was a terrible but fearfully brave, or fearlessly brave, child, cutting down trees, sacred trees, scaring old men and priests, and so on. But by 12, he could stand up against anyone, so my friend told me. He was very tall and strong, like a batter, a hero, or a dir, a giant. The Kitai and the Kalmuks decided to kill him because he would be a threat, but no one could beat him. And so he formed his own group of 40 followers, his Kyrgyzchoro, clever-minded Khans of the Kyrgyz, such as Bakai, Koshoy. And on the advice of old Koshoy, he led the Kyrgyz back to Alai, to their motherland, which involved many struggles and many battles. And there are many strands of this story, and they include things like the marriage of Manas to his wife Kanike, and as I've said, many of these were put together during the Soviet period. And finally, at the end of one battle, Manas was betrayed and killed by a Kitai, Kongrabai. These are the main facts, my friend said. And then he added, in Manas, you can see how to bring up children and how to care for nature and old people and how to live with neighbours and foreigners. And indeed, Manas does also contain details of local ecology, ways to live in the mountain environment. These are condensations of lived practical experience incorporated through many tellings by many poets and singers. It's a kind of living ethno-history as well as a powerful tale of politics and war. In terms of sound, Manas is composed to be sung or spoken, not read or seen through the eyes, however. It's composed entirely through vocalization in performance. Epics are dependent on our human capacity for understanding through hearing, through song, and through speech. And perhaps this is reflected in the Kyrgyz word which means in English song, or poetry, which doesn't have the same division between poetry and song that we might make. There are many forms of for example, simple songs, wedding songs, memorial songs, and so on. And some shorter forms of these are themselves incorporated into the larger or into larger episodes of the epic. But this division between song and poetry isn't made absolutely clear. And a second important musical notion is the Kyrgyz term ku, which I know that Saida is going to be talking about later, so I won't develop that too long. But basically the word ku is actually, it's played on the Kyrgyz komus, a 3-string lute. And the word means literally a frame of mind or a mood, but it's also a kind of narrative that is told purely through playing this instrument. So the singer might, or the player might recount the story or the event or the legend through before he plays, but the actual story is literally told through the musicality and the melody with no words. Now, that sound without words can convey mood or even narrative is very relevant to the performance of epics, whether Kyrgyz or whatever language, but in this particular case, I think it's very important, and to the non-verbal contribution of sound in the telling of an epic. And this emphasis on sound, which I think is there in Kyrgyz poetics, is further elaborated by 3 additional factors. And these are just a little bit complicated, but I hope you don't mind me just pausing to explain these. I think these 3 factors are the agglutinative rhyming quality of spoken Kyrgyz, the iconicity or the bodily resonance of the Kyrgyz language, and then the use of onomatopoeia or environmental resonance in the sound of the song as sung by the manaschi or manas singer. So just to explain these a little more, Kyrgyz, like Turkish and other Turkic languages, is a language which uses vowel harmonies and rhyming suffixes added on to the ends of word to convey additional nuances of meaning. And this means that the language itself has quite a strong poetic form. And then the iconicity of languages in general, which was first raised, I think, really by Alfred Gell in relation to the Umeda language, I think is also applicable to the Kyrgyz language and probably also to Kazakh and other related languages. Umeda is actually it's a Pacific language, and Gell argues it's like poetry because the meaning of words resonates with the bodily process of making the sound. How the mouth makes sounds and creates it through movement of the nose and through changing the kind of cavity, the mouth cavity, resonates with what the meaning of words is, in more cases in Umeda than, say, for example, in spoken English. He'd say that there's a kind of primary iconicity, and I'd suggest in Kyrgyz similarly, there's a similar degree of what Gell calls this primary iconicity. So, for example, just two simple examples, the word kichi or kichiniki, which means little or very little. These are it involves a very small mouth with a very front kind of spoken sound, whereas and that means small itself. And whereas ach, which means open or hungry, is a back sound and it involves an open mouth. So I think that what I'm arguing here is that there is quite a strong iconicity in spoken Kyrgyz. And then finally, in terms of onomatopoeia, and I think we've come across this used by anthropologists such as Stephen Feld. Here we're talking about the general resonance of the sung or spoken words with sounds from the environment. And certainly in Manas there's an expectation that Kyrgyz singers will convey the sound of the environment, whether it's the mountains, the weather, the animals, through the voice, as the Komus could convey mood through melody, as he was just talking. And I think it was very interesting hearing Carol's lecture just now, how she was discussing the different styles of Humi, and she mentioned that they had, and all the names of these styles had names like wolf sound, I think was one of them that I recall, and so on. So I'll just play a brief extract from that Sally Pom Clayton let me use of a Manas singer, and I think you'll hear that this when you hear his singing. So I've talked a little bit about sound, but also in terms of meaningful language as opposed to resonant sound. Parallel poetic devices are used to evoke significant relationships with the landscape. And in Manas, these devices include metaphor, contrasting use of parallel or reversed imagery, and so on, calling to mind the links between characters and the natural environment. So thus, when Manas calls his 40 followers, each time mentioning their names individually, along with the unique skills and their qualities, repetitively, these evoke parallel yet contrasting capabilities, and at the same time, each person's attachment to the local geography. For example, Kaman and Jaipur, even in the darkness, never lose the wolf track. Tursan and Tailak, even at night, never lose the fox track, and so on, and so on, and so on. But most particularly, the whole epic being permeated with the imagery of the heroic spirit, celebrating manliness through hyperbole, but also associating heroes with sacred animals and forces of nature. So, for example, here we have text like Kite of the hills, Almanbed, grey-maned he-wolf, Almanbed, who, when he fights, from his mouth smoke poured out from his eyes, flames leapt up, crackling, the weather changed with a roar, a cloud was ripped open in the sky. Against the heavens all aflame, Almanbed loomed like a dragon. And this very powerful, resonant, repetitive imagery, sonic and verbal, evoking bodily attunement and human relationships with the landscape, is what I'd argue gives Kyrgyz epic poetry its force and its power. And this is because epics evoke very strong images through words, which people can both relate to, yet which also through sound and the details of the epic connect people to the local geography in a very visceral kind of way. And ironically, this is almost at odds with the sort of things that Walter Ong says, where he argues that strong imagery in epics is a kind of mnemonic device to enable the singers to recall all the words in such a poem. In response to this, I'd agree more with Albert Lord that such epics are not memorised word for word, but improvised around themes. And one informant in the field certainly said to me that these repetitive, powerful images, each time phrased slightly differently, make the episodes come alive through the slight variations in image, rather like the process of projecting variations of a drawn film frame in animation. And what this suggests, and what I'm arguing, is that by evoking such powerful imagery and by situating it in so forcefully in the local landscape, the audience is brought almost inside history itself. Rather like Hershkin's description of the body becoming permeated with emotion through listening to cassette recordings of the Quran in Egypt, which creates a kind of moral kinesthetic experience, I'd suggest that listening to a live performance of Manas permeates the body with the past through bodily and environmental resonances, creating a kind of Kyrgyzness which is both regionally and temporally situated. And the possibility that through epic performance, the Manaschi brings some people at least inside their own histories, I think is reinforced through accounts that I've had given to me in the field, for example, from the Jailo, the summer pastures, where people will talk about events that have happened in the past, such as, for example, past battles, or the creation of features of the landscape. So one friend, for example, or several friends, but one friend, for example, describing a battle with the Kalmucks, said, well, the Kalmucks were here, they were over there, and they came up over that ridge over there, and the battle was fought there, and so on and so forth. And yet he's talking about a battle that took place maybe more than 100 years ago, and he's talking about it certainly something that happened before his lifetime. And similarly, people describe the power of speaking in strong words through which the weather might change or the course of people's lives' event can be affected. Even an earthquake might be set in motion through the use of strong words. Now, just to conclude, if an epic can evoke the past, it also incorporates life as it goes on through the Russian conquest, the Soviet era, through independence and the formation of the nation-state and global capitalism. And as the landscape of Manas changes, so does the soundscape and the sound of Manas. I would say none that I can think of more so than the kind of monumental sound of Manas when sung during the Soviet period, for example. So this is a recording from a CD of a Soviet cultural troupe.
Hey, ay kölüngürdü yol benen, hodudun bol benen, 18 ayga jul жүрүп, хоргу аскер бол жүрүп, казганак тажараданып, караган пенде таң калып, жеп тартып кылкылдап, желектин бары былкылдап, темирден айса жылтылдап, бет алышкан душмандын, акырыңе жүрегиңе мыразы пылдап жүрсөй. Hey, ay köl manna çalkayıp,
On Kyrgyz independence in 1991, President Akayev cited Manas as the only ideology that the fledgling Kyrgyz nation needed to move forward in a global context. And he also inaugurated a Manas festival, which brought together the first camp of all the Kyrgyz different groups since the last Kyrgyz Ordo in the early 20th century. And here Manas was performed with a cast of thousands in Talas, which is where he was probably buried. But he was also everywhere in the landscape. In Manas's engagement with Europe and America, I won't play this clip, but certainly you can see he was also everywhere, even in the centre of consumption, the new consumption that came, and if you want to listen to this later, Tengir Tor's Smithsonian recording of Manas even involves a kind of backing instrumentalisation, but you can also see the way the singer on the CD is actually situated within the landscape. And just finally, so who are going to be the new Manaschis? the theory is that Manasseh comes to you in a dream, or Manasseh's warriors come to you in a dream, and you wake up knowing how to sing it. But I certainly found from the young children that I know who were interested that certainly this particular boy, a child who I spent a lot of my time with when I first went to the field, he watched the TV, he listened to documentaries, he sat and got his mum to teach him Manas. And so when he was filmed, ironically again, he's filmed here in the midst of the kind of local environment, with kids actually painting him mountains in the background. And at the same time, he'll only sing if he's offered chocolate. This sound recording is very, very brief, and it's very poor quality because the wind got up when we were recording it and the weather intervened. But I hope you'll get a just sense of how it went. Okay, so, I mean, I think he's still bringing the sound of the environment and of the nature into his voice, even at 3 years old, really. So that's all I have to say on the subject. Thank you.